Greetings, beloved of God. Welcome to a new week of devotions. We begin on this day with Psalm 136. If you read this ahead of time or you've read it before, you recognize that every verse finishes with, "For his steadfast love endures forever." So rather than read each one of those parts of it, I'll read periodically that part of it. But if you would like, I invite you to either think it in your head or say it out loud after each verse. For his steadfast love endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the God of gods. Give thanks to the Lord of lords, who alone does great wonders, who by understanding made the heavens, who spread out the earth on the waters, who made the great lights, the sun to rule over the day, the moon and stars to rule over the night. For his steadfast love endures forever. Who struck Egypt through their firstborn, and brought Israel out from among them. With a strong hand and an outstretched arm, who divided the Red Sea in two, and made Israel pass through the midst of it, but overthrew Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea, who led his people through the wilderness, who struck down great kings and killed famous kings, Sihon, king of the Amorites, Og, king of Bashan, and gave their land as a heritage to his servant Israel. For his steadfast love endures forever. It is he who remembered us in our low estate and rescued us from our foes, who gives food to all flesh. For his steadfast love endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the God of heaven, for his steadfast love endures forever. So clearly, and quite obviously, this is a hymn of praise. And specifically, it seems to be celebrating something that we've talked about, or I've talked about in previous hymns, because it is a recurring theme, or in the Psalms, it is a recurring theme in the Psalms of God being steadfast and faithful. And this particular psalm, it is related to God's steadfast love, and it goes through, well, after an initial call to praise for God's steadfast love and being the God of gods and the Lord of lords, then goes into a section recounting the creation process of God, who created the heavens and the earth and the waters and the heavens, well, the sun and the moon and the stars. And then the next section, the main part of the psalm, is a remembrance of the Exodus story, and then moving into the conquest of the promised land of Canaan that God had promised to Abraham. And then it finishes again with God's provisions of all flesh, and a final, once again, reminder to praise and give thanks to God. So all of those things, the things that are mentioned in this psalm, the creation story, the liberation of the people from Egypt, the keeping of the covenant that God made with Abraham, that he would give Israel the land of promise, all of that, including the provisions of giving food to all flesh in verse 25, all emanates out of a place of God's love. God created the heavens and the earth, not because he had to, not because he could. There's no doubt about those things. Not so that God could somehow prove his greatness to any thing or even to the people and creatures that he created. God created everything out of love and made us human beings the pinnacle of his creation, because we are the pinnacle of his love. And he gave us dominion over the earth. He gave the earth basically over to us as an act of love, because God is love. Objects to love are a part of that. And so he created us out of this deep, deep sense of being love itself. God is love again. And then the Exodus story, certainly, and the keeping of the covenant, the promises that God made. He does those things not because he has to or needs to prove anything to any person, that he is true and faithful in his ways. He does it out of love. He makes those covenants, created those covenants, not as a set of rules for people simply to follow, but out of the great love that he has for his people, to teach them a better way to live their lives, to teach a way for them to order their lives. And he being at the center of it, not in an egotistical, self-centered sort of manner, but God knows that a life with him is going to be better than a life that is spent apart from him. And even just the way that he provides for creation, for animals and plants and whatever else, food for us all to eat. It is all a blessing from God. It all comes from him. We do not create any of that on our own. It is all a creation of God. And again, it's out of love. And so the love of God is all around us in creation. It is evident to us everywhere. As far as liberation, he has certainly liberated us from the penalty of sin. And God does not fight our human enemies necessarily, but does fight the enemy of the devil in our world so that he has no power over us. God is continually pouring out his love into our lives, even if we don't recognize it, and even if we don't appreciate it, or even give thanks to him for it, because again, God simply is love, and there is nothing else he can do but to do things out of love. God never does things out of spite or out of hate or out of anger. God does things out of a place of love, because that's just who God is. And so we are blessed beyond measure to be the recipients and on the receiving end of those blessings that emanate from God and his love. So he is certainly worthy of our praise and our thanks for all of that. That's our devotion for today. Tomorrow we have Psalm 137, and man, are we getting close to the end of this. Until then, remember, you are loved.